What is your worst sleepover experience? Story 1. Was very young when two friends stayed over. I was about to sleep with my eyes shut when one randomly started shit talking about me, thinking I was asleep, and the other joined in after some hesitation. They even considered I was awake and tried to slap me awake to make sure they were safe. I haven't forgotten about it since, even though it's been about 20 years. Story 2. At a friend's birthday party or sleepover when we were around 11 to 12 years old. About 5 of us were on the back patio doing "that's what she said" jokes since we just learned about them from the show The Office. I guess I took it a little too far when I said I'd like a big cock in my mouth. That's what she said. Soon as I finished saying it, I looked over to my friend's father standing at the open sliding door in complete silence. Story 3. My friend and I both got diarrhea from eating bad nachos. He shat his pants, and my dad had to give him a pair of shorts that fit him loose. And later we were jumping on the bed headbanging to Metallica, and his shorts slipped and I saw his peen. Story 4. One of the first times, if not the first time, spending the night with a friend at the time. I must have been 10 or 11, maybe 12. He was a year or two older. We were teammates. Families were friends. Realized once I was at their house that the family, mom, dad, my friend, his younger brother, were vicious yellers. Seemed like no conversation could end without some member of the family screaming at another. It was never really violent, but just really wild and loud the entire time. Culminated in the younger brother getting into a huge screaming fight with my friend, followed by his mom discovering my friend's ADHD meds were missing, followed by my friend being accused of stealing and selling his ADHD meds at school by both his parents, mom crying and dad absolutely furious, followed by a car ride to a gas station nearby to meet my parents so they could pick me up, all from members of the family screaming at each other and throwing accusations and calling each other names the entire time, with me just sitting there like, what? 11-year-old me was very excited to go home. Story 5. When I was about 12, I went to a sleepover at my best friend's house for his birthday. His family was great, and I always felt welcome there. The sleepover was pretty typical. We watched a movie, ate junk food, went to bed but didn't sleep. We just stayed up all night talking and eating sweets. At the crack of dawn, we snuck downstairs to play a game on the family PC. This was the mid-90s. Everything was going well, and the strategy we'd planned during the night was working perfectly. But then, out of nowhere, probably due to sleep deprivation and a sugar overload, my friend had a full-on seizure. He let out a guttural moan that terrified me. Panicking, I ran upstairs to wake his parents, and they quickly called an ambulance. He was taken to the hospital for tests, with his dad going along. His mom, still calm and kind, offered me some breakfast before I grabbed my things and walked the short distance home. As soon as I saw my mom, the shock of what had happened hit me, and I broke down. Thankfully, my friend didn't have any serious health issues, and we're still best friends to this day. In fact, we've even been each other's best man. Story 6. I was friends with a twin as a preteen. Obviously, she and her twin shared a birthday. One year, they had a huge sleepover with both their friend groups. We were all having a blast. And when night came, we realized it would be really cramped if the two friend groups tried to squish into the two girls' respective bedrooms. I suggested we all sleep on the floor and couches in their downstairs living room. The downstairs was its own suite, separate kitchen, bathrooms, everything. It was nowhere near the parents' room and brother's room upstairs, so there was no way us doing this would affect anyone else in the family, and we were all girls. But according to her parents, my suggestion was the equivalent of high treason and blasphemy to the highest degree. Full-on publicly berated me in front of all the other girls at the sleepover and told me that wasn't allowed and also stupid. Whatever then. So, we all squeezed into the two tiny bedrooms, and nobody got any sleep. I figured at the time it was one of those things I'd eventually understand as an adult, but here I am, 30 years old and still baffled. Story 7. Was sharing a bed with two friends, and at one point in the night I heard one giving the other head. I just pretended to be asleep until one of them started groping me. He said, "Come on dude, I can handle both of you." I just said no thanks, and he went back to sucking the other. Thing was, we were 14 and I barely knew them at this point. I never mentioned it. Story 8. We were talking and laughing in her room after her parents told us to go to bed. Her dad came and spanked both his daughters and then me for still being up. I told my mom about it, and she said I should have gone to bed then. It wasn't no patty pat either. It was full body thrown into it while he screamed at us until his face was red to go to bed. After he left, we just laid there in silence with the light still on. Breakfast was quiet the next morning too. Story 9. One of my classmates had a big camp out in her backyard in elementary school. I was already scared, but then we kept hearing sounds outside. The girl just shrugged it off and said, "Sometimes their elderly neighbor wanders around their backyard." I was so scared, I ran barefoot in the pitch black to their house and fell asleep on their couch. Story 10. Well, I wouldn't call it a sleepover, but after a night of drinking, I completely blacked out. The last thing I remember is me and some friends walking in a pouring rain because no taxi would take us. When I woke up, I had absolutely no recollection of how did the last night end. Then I opened my eyes and it was pitch dark. I was violently hungover, in a completely dark room somewhere. Every step I made, I stumbled into something which fell on the floor. It took me around 2 minutes of moving slowly around the room trying to find a light switch. After 2 minutes, I stepped on something soft, sat here, ouch. I almost shit my pants, found out it was my friend. I stepped on his balls. He told me we are in his cellar turned clubhouse. A pretty weird few minutes when you wake up not knowing where you are and there are no visual clues to give you an idea. Story 11. When I was about 13, I had one of those VHS combo TVs in my room because it was the only one that I could use the N64 on. I had my besties over for a sleepover and horror movies as per usual, but we had watched all of mine. I was rooting around my parents' old collection of VHS and found one that looked like it said Halloween on it, and we all sat in bed ready to watch it. To our absolute horror, it actually said Halloweeny, and it was a cheesy old 70 seconds porno. Traumatizing. Story 12. Put on the song Rape Me by Nirvana. Girl in attendance asked what rape means. We tell her. She breaks down crying that she thinks her dad raped her. I never listened to the song again. Shortly afterwards, my friend moved in with her aunt. We're adults and she is doing great now. Story 13. Back around 1995-96, my best friend and I slept over at another kid's house. Let's call him Bob. We were around 13 years old. My friend and I had hung out with Bob a few times, but neither of us had been to his house. We met at Bob's place, and things started out fine. His living situation was different than either of ours. Bob lived with his 2 younger brothers and a single mom. They struggled to make ends meet and lived in a townhouse in a rougher neighborhood. No big deal, but I had lived a pretty naive and sheltered life to this point, so it was different for me. Mom left frozen lasagna for all the kids. Bob was in charge of looking after the 2 younger brothers. Mom was going out on a date and would be back later. We ate dinner and were all having a good time. The little brothers went to bed in their rooms. Me, my friend, and Bob were going to sleep in the basement in sleeping bags. We stayed up late in the basement. Out of nowhere, Bob asked if we wanted to see his mom's dildo. I didn't know what a dildo was, but my friend did. It vibrated and we all touched it. I asked what it was for, and Bob and my friend were like, "She pretends it's a penis." I pretend to know what that meant, and nodded my head like I was saying, "Yes, of course." How foolish of me. I assumed it meant she pretended she was male and had a dick. I clued in months or years later when I learned how dildos were used, and the memory of this sleepover popped into my head. Then, around 1-2 a.m., headlights from the driveway are noticed shining through the basement window. Bob looks outside and says, "Oh fuck, pretend you're asleep or we're fucking dead." Being a naive kid, I was terrified. I could hear a lot of footsteps upstairs above us. At least 3 to 4 people were upstairs, including Bob's mom. Eventually it quieted down, but Bob and my friend had already fallen asleep. I lay on the floor terrified and wide awake all night and rode my bike home around 9 a.m. In hindsight, Bob was just a kid who was exposed to some things at a young age and grew up fast because of it. He was often home alone or left in charge of his brothers. So, he explored the house and found sex toys, I guess. His mom would go on dates, and sometimes there'd be a few more drinks at home at the end of the night with friends or people she had met that night. Bob just didn't want to get in trouble for still being awake at 2 a.m. Story 14. We both made so many jokes about being gay and how we would like to fuck that we actually couldn't sleep close to one another and woke up every time one of us moved at night. Story 15. I was in a small friend group in elementary school with this girl named Jess. Jess and I were the closest of all of the girls in our group. Jess invited me and another girl, Paris, over early as a pre-party party. During this time, Paris had been acting crazy. She ran all over the house, doing all sorts of things. At one point, she had found a chair with wheels and was going all around the house, rolling on it. She eventually ran into one of the walls and made a dent. She later pulled some things off of Jess's walls by accident. The rest of the kids got there later, so now there were about 10 of us. There was only one bathroom Jess's parents would let us use, which was attached to their bedroom. They didn't want us to have full access to it, so they made us line up to use it every few hours. One of the times, I got paired with Paris. We would go in. One of the girls would step into the shower while the other used the restroom. I used the restroom first, and Paris was still insane. She kept peeking around the shower curtain to mess with me and kept opening and closing the shower curtain really fast. When I told her to cut it out, she decided to grab the shower curtain bar and pull herself up. I finished using the bathroom and went to the shower. The curtain rod looked bent, and I was messing with it when it collapsed on me, obviously from what Paris was doing with it. When we came out of the bathroom, Paris put all the blame on me, and Jess's mom believed her. I tried saying it was Paris who did it, but her mom told me it was rude to accuse other people. I got a very stern talking to, and I was pretty much ignored the rest of the night by Jess and Paris. The next morning, most of our parents came to pick us up. My mom offered Paris a ride home since my mom knew her mom, and Paris declined, saying she was staying for a bit longer. Apparently, I hadn't been invited to the post-party party. Jess completely stopped talking to me after that night, and I still don't know exactly why. I'm guessing her mom hated me after that night and convinced Jess to as well. Story 16. I was at a friend's house back in grade school whose parents were in the middle of a really nasty divorce. The dad showed up halfway through the evening while we were eating dinner, and they both went into the master bedroom and locked the door. The noises went from screaming for over an hour to extremely loud moaning from his mom being anger plowed. We were 10 or 11 at the time, so when the moaning started, my friend went and knocked on the door to be greeted by his now completely wasted and fully nude mother. She said everything was okay, then shut the door and came back out a few minutes later in a robe. The mom sat with us for 10 minutes trying to explain what was going on, saying something to the tune of, "Those are just noises adults make when they're angry," only to be interrupted by now drunk dad yelling nonsense from the kitchen. She leaves the room, and the screaming starts again, but this time it's really loud because it's in the kitchen. Very quickly after we heard a loud slam and more screaming, so we went to the kitchen to find her and the pizza or wings or sauces all over the floor. She was crying hysterically, and he was leaving the room to go back to the bedroom while being told to get out of the house. He locked himself in the bedroom. She got up, started frantically slamming her hands and knees on the door trying to break it down. Then out of nowhere she just got silent and turned around and walked out to the garage. The whole house was quiet for about 5 minutes until the door to the bedroom opened. The dad asked where she went, so we pointed to the garage and he went in and shut the door. 30 seconds later he came bursting back inside covered in blood and yelled at my friend and I to leave and go to my house next street over. We left and sprinted to my mom's at about 3 in the morning. The rest after was a blur of ambulance, police, parents, blood, lots of crying. She didn't die but apparently took a hacksaw off of his old workbench and attempted to slit her throat with it. Lost a lot of blood but didn't cut enough to die. Story 17. Bear in mind that at the time I was a kid, and I had no idea. It's only now, as an adult, I realize how creepy it was, and due to the fact that the man went to prison about 10 years ago. When I was around 8, I had a sleepover at a girl who was in my school year's house for her birthday. There was me and 5 other girls. One of the girls was my best friend. We don't know why we got invited. We weren't super close to the girl, but we got invited so we went, and it was the one and only time we ever went to her house. In the middle of the night, when everyone was asleep, I'd woken up, and I was just laying there in the dark. I could hear heavy breathing and a noise. I looked up from my sleeping bag, and I could just about see it was the girl's dad, and he was standing next to my sleeping bag in his underwear, breathing super heavy and weirdly. He heard me move, and he kinda panicked. He whispered, "Are you awake?" So, I said yes and he said, "I was just making sure everyone was okay," and then he quickly left the room. As an 8-year-old, I didn't think anything of it, and it quickly became an irrelevant memory, and as I got older, I forgot about it tbh. I never brought it up or told anyone about it, because at the time I didn't know what he was doing. Until about 10 years ago, I was 20 at the time, my best friend called me and said, "Remember years ago, that girl from school, whose house we went to and slept over for her birthday?" So I said yeah, because I remembered after she asked that, and she said, her dad's just been sent down for being a pedo. And I was like, WF? And then it all kinda made sense to me, what he was doing when he was looming over my sleeping bag. So, yeah, I'd say now, as an adult, looking back, that was my worst sleepover experience. That's all for now. Thanks for listening to Digital Apathy.